This is in light of what he's actually talking about. On the front page of the Star, I can just give you a snippet of why Kalonzo was in Sudan. Kalonzo in Juba, you read this. He says, despite murmurs from his party, Wiper leader Kalonzo Musyoka began work yesterday as special peace envoy. Kalonzo, accompanied by Foreign Affairs CS Monica Juma, flew to Juba and delivered Uhuru's congratulatory message to President Salva Kiir for implementing new peace agreement. This story is on page 6 of the Star. New peace agreement, and we thought also predicated on this particular agreement was the release of political prisoners. Some of them have been released, but some haven't. And I know also Irungu Houghton has mentioned Peter Biar Ajak. Peter Biar Ajak has been a panelist on Standing on Guard, and we've been talking about this. Now it is 3 months and 15 days since he was actually arrested and put in the slumbers in South Sudan. And right now, he has not been taken to court. We don't know, what the charges are. This actually is a website where some of the classmates from Harvard University and Cambridge University actually opened up for people to sign petition for Dr. Peter Biar Ajak's release. And just a snippet of them that are joining us, and they are not aware and they're not in the loop. Peter Biar Ajak was arrested in South Sudan on July 28th. Peter is a youth advocate for peace and a friend and inspiration to many who know him around the world. He is currently being held without charge at the notorious South Sudanese prison known as the Blue House. His friends at university, human rights institutions, media organizations, and others around the world are calling for his release. Peter's arrest comes amid a worrying trend in arbitrary detentions due to a crackdown on freedom of expression by South Sudanese government. Amnesty International reports numerous recent arrests without charges. This goes against South Sudan's constitution, which states no one can be held without charge for more than 24 hours. So this has been 3 months right now since he was arrested. Peter was one of the lost boys of the South Sudan, displaced during the war when he was young. He lived in refugee camps before being taken to the United States by humanitarian charities. Once in the U.S., he learned English and studied hard, securing a place at the LaSalle University, then completed a master's at Harvard before joining for PhD at Cambridge University in the UK. His inspirational story was recognized when he became an Atlantic Council Millennium Fellow and Desmond Tutu Leadership Fellow. In June, Peter was awarded the Crans Montana Forum's New Leader for Tomorrow Award by His Excellency Musa Traore, former president of Mali. Peter has always kept his focus on South Sudan and his hope for a peaceful future for his country. He has worked in think tanks, his national government, and institutions working for development and peace. He has dedicated himself for creating opportunities for dialogue among South Sudan young, that is South Sudan youth, running wrestling tournaments across the country to bring young people together and to celebrate South Sudan's unique culture. And he formed the South Sudan Young Leaders Forum, bringing together young leaders, both men and women, from across ethnicities and politics to encourage youth throughout the countryside to embrace peaceful dialogue. Up to now, I think we are at 78,815 people who have actually signed this petition. The target is 150,000, and still this is ongoing. But I want now to rope in also Dr. Njoki Wamai, who was also a former classmate of Peter Biar Ajak, just to give us a snippet of what is really the current state of play as far as Peter is concerned. You're with Peter at Cambridge. Just bring us up to speed on what is happening and right now, what is the way forward. Talking about Special Envoy Kalonzo to now South Sudan. This was also a pact on the new peace agreement that, yes, they should release political prisoners. We've had some who have been released, but others have not been released. And of course, the breakout from the Blue House also, that really also added another tripwire to, maybe the release of Peter Biar Ajak.
Yes, Peter and I studied at the University of Cambridge. We actually are very close because we share a supervisor, a PhD supervisor.
Yes.
Dr. Sharad Srinivasan. And so he's like my brother academically. And many of us, when I was in Cambridge, of course, they continue to have, the university first is very concerned, the student community, and I think also Harvard, where he studied. As you can see, he's quite an inspiring person, having been a lost boy, participated in the war, gone to the US, studied, and gone to Harvard and Cambridge. And one thing about Peter, he was always focused on the ball, South Sudan. Even when we were at Cambridge, half the time he was in South Sudan, trying to organize this youth meeting or the other. So his passion for change in his country was quite, and it continues to be quite evident. And I think he's going to be one of the change makers and continues to be a change maker. And probably that's part of the reason that the authorities found that they, kind of want to limit him. And so I would ask Kalonzo Musyoka, I think that's, especially on Peter Biar Ajak, that's one of the main, I think, focus that he should focus on, not just him, and of course the others who've been arrested, arbitrary detention. It's quite a number of people. And because if we are going to have a democratic South Sudan, I think that is one of the things that we must focus on, the ending of arbitrary detention, the national security in the Blue House, and the kind of things going on there, torture. So that needs to be dealt with, and I think that should be one of his focus, in addition to the rest of the issues in the peace agreement. And especially, there are so many people now, it's been 3 months. We thought it was a joke initially, and so we hope that we probably now having a high-level diplomat like Kalonzo get in, we can bring more traction to this, yes.
Right. And let's just hear from Ambassador, because this matter also has been taken by East Africa, Court of Justice to help free Juba political prisoners, one of which is also Peter Biar Ajak. And we had the Arusha-based Pan-African Lawyers Union, which went to the East African Court of Justice to force the South Sudanese government to release political detainees. We don't know an update on this as well. But from the African Union perspective, when we have such cases and we have a violation of a constitution, when we have 24 hours for you actually to be, produced in court, and this has not really happened, then what is the way forward?
Yeah, Dipal, it's a very complex situation for South Sudan because the fragility of that nation is worrisome. I was briefed to the report that was prepared by President Obasanjo, looking at, the violation of human rights that were committed by both sides during this war that started in 2013. And one of the worrying aspects was the lack of respect. I mean, if you see how, for instance, the women have suffered under that situation, the children that have been drafted into it, and wanton destruction of property and all aspects of human rights is indeed a situation that puts South Sudan as a spectre to all of us in the world, to challenge us, because if indeed they want to be members of East African community, there must be some modicum of as Irungu was saying, of democracy. And one of the tenets of even of African Union is you must respect human rights. That's as one of the tenets that we really espouse. And I would really, through this, make a challenge and to international community, to the African Union and other leaders, to continue to put pressure on the leadership of South Sudan, first of all, to implement that peace accord in earnest. And in that situation, if that prevails, we should start to see the release of all prisoners, addressing the issue of human rights, bringing to justice those that have committed, like the case that was mentioned in Ethiopia. My worry, and based on what even Njoka has just told us, is whether, and we have said this before, that there is any willingness on the part of this current leadership to address this seriously. That's why I see Kalonzo Musyoka's really job cut out to try and impress on them to move forward and bring peace. I mean, the country went through 25 years of war, of liberation. Only 2 years they went into conflict, and even during those 2 years, there was not much done. All there was fighting for who was controlling the petroleum docket and who was going to steal what money. All this money is out of the country. The country has not had any peace for the last 30 or 50 years. It's a sad situation. And that is a country that you can call a country for integration. It's serious, actually.
All right, Dr. Mustafa.
Yeah, Dibal, we've said here on this panel before that South Sudan basically at the moment is a basket case. It's shameful that the country just went to war immediately after getting independence.
Even with the new peace agreement?
Yes, it's still a basket case, Dibal. There is no guarantee that that peace agreement is going to hold. Many peace agreements have been signed by the leaders in South Sudan, and shortly thereafter they've reneged on that, and people have been, or rather warlords have you know, new warlords have been created. Who knew that Paul Malong was going to start fighting the government itself that he was serving for such a long time? Already we see that there are elements of not meeting or you know, the part of bargains from either Riek Machar or Salva Kiir. The fact that Peter Biar Ajak is still incarcerated without any charge, and yet the peace agreement says that all political prisoners must be released, is a pointer that those guys are not serious, and they have to get serious, Adibat. I do not think that the current leadership in South Sudan is going to take that country further than they already have. We thank them, the South Sudanese, I believe, thank them for the work they've done, liberating that country. It's about time that they really consider nurturing another set of leaders that is not militarized, that are not from the bush. You know, fighting an insurgency and in the bush is a different game from governing a country that is now independent. Salva Kiir and Riek Machar are supposed to be statesmen that are now advising a leadership, a new leadership that is in South Sudan. I hope that the next things they are going to do, and Kalonzo Musyoka is really going to plead with those two leaders, is to release Peter Biar Ajak and all the other political prisoners, and then move that country, have even if it's a 5-year plan, that is going to have a change of leadership in that country, Dibal. South Sudan is actually not a poor country. It has a lot of resources, and it can move. Indeed, it was actually just starting to move. But now I think everything is still at a standstill, and it's going to take time.
All right. Let's hear from Irungu Houghton, because according to Amnesty International report that was published in September under the title A Trail of Broken Promises, South Sudanese authorities have arbitrarily arrested, detained, tortured and ill-treated people to the point of death despite repeated promises to release detainees. And it says people in South Sudan have been arrested for their political and ethnic affiliations and are then subjected to an unimaginable suffering, sometimes leading to death at the hands of the government security forces. This is according to, that is Saif Magango, Amnesty International's Deputy Director for East Africa, the Horn and the Great Lakes. And of course, these were sentiments also that were agreed, or maybe it was in concert with Sarah Jackson as well, of Amnesty International South Sudan as well. From that particular standpoint, and I think also you have a sort of an age in trying to push the envelope. Aside from this particular report, what are you doing as Amnesty International? I think also Sudan, Amnesty International South Sudan had picked an interest on Peter Biar Ajak's case.
South Sudan has been in darkness for many years now, and that darkness is not just a political condition, it is also a social condition. Fear of being harassed for one's political views, for expressing a view on public affairs and how resources should be used, fighting corruption, all the things that across the continent are essentially part of our development now. Are completely denied within the southern part of Sudan, or South Sudan as we now formally call it. I think the report that we did in September, which of course came before the peace accord, still stands. Many of the people that we were concerned about still remain in, and Peter, I think, is just one of those people. Yes. I think that report needs to be read in context of, or rather in conjunction with the recent UN panel of experts report that was released in the last 48 hours. That basically demonstrates that not only has the arms embargo been violated in the last 2 months during the time that the peace accord was being negotiated, but also that sexual violence, human rights violations have taken place in the, I guess, in the shadows of the negotiations for the peace accord. And I think for me, what that often suggests is that a behavioral shift has not yet happened. Until that happens, I think Ambassador is correct, and I think Jockey is correct to point out that until there is a very steady path towards a democratic process within South Sudan, you are not going to see anything but leaders who are basically walking wounded continue to inflict violence on each other, and more importantly, to inflict violence on large numbers of people. So I think that's the context in which we work. The other thing that I think we should be concerned about really is how the interests within South Sudan have externalized themselves across the different economies of the region. So, for example, the timber industry, for the last many years now, the militias have actually been funded by essentially the timber industry, which I think is worth something between $10 and $11 million. And that has actually fueled the war. So I think what we need to think about as neighbors and friends of South Sudan is how do we close the taps for the militia groups to ensure that they are not able to prosecute their differences through military means, but now have to come to a democratic way of negotiating. And if they can be turned into political parties without military wings, that is I guess that is the way forward for a democracy.
Thank you. And just maybe to ask you also, because he has been deprived of fair trial by the National Security Service in South Sudan right now, and this is, as I mentioned, 3 months down the line, a violation of course, his rights. Where he's detained, the facilities there inhumane. That is a blue house. We know about how torture is done in that particular house as well. But the question will be, was his only crime the IGAD-led peace process analysis that he did? Or, because I think that one really triggered, and many people are suspicious of that particular IGAD-led, and I think this is the one that actually led to this particular peace that we do have here, that he was really against the bloated government of South Sudan.
I mean, we can speculate, but actually court of law, a court of law essentially operates under very strict rules. You have to be accused, you have to face your accuser, and you must have the right to defend yourself. None of this has happened in the context of Peter. So I would prefer not to speculate, but to simply say that Peter is not yet charged, he is innocent of all charges, and should be released. Or he should be placed in a court of law and availed with lawyers and legal advice and be able to defend himself. Until that happens, there is no charge against Peter. He is simply been arrested arbitrarily and without any due process of law.
Okay, so what is the way forward, Naomi Damba?
Dubal, unfortunately, as my colleagues here correctly stated, South Sudan has taken the ugly path of DRG Congo. It's a basket case. The leadership and the people in Southern Sudan are not serious. There is an extremely great pressure from outside, from small arms dealers to other natural resources to petroleum product. And so I think we need to come to realize the very existence of AU and what its purpose is all about. We need to take a look at East Africa and say who need to join us, under what criteria. We need to see the role that IGAD is playing, and South Sudan, the message is under no uncertain. Could you be a humble members of this union?
Thank you.
Unless you correct yourself.
Thank you, Professor. Of course, we want to take a short break right now. We'll circle back, we continue a bit with that, and of course look at what is happening, of course, around the world as far as security is concerned. You're watching Standing on Guard, where we keep an eye on the enemy. As we're taking a short break, Wayne Chavulimu Kalika is saying for sustainable peace to be achieved in South Sudan, justice must be realized in tandem. Political prisoners, human rights must be pursued. Peter Biar Ajak and other political prisoners must be freed. Right, we take a short break right now. When we circle back, we continue the discussion and a lot of other issues as well as far as security is concerned. Don't go away. Right, welcome back. You're watching Standing on Guard, where we're keeping an eye on the enemy. Of course, we continue apace with the conversation. We're still advocating for the release of Peter Biar Ajak, who is one of our panelists. If you're joining us, Peter Biar Ajak has been a very vocal panelist here as far as South Sudan security issues are concerned. There's still this particular website, that is the change.org, that is seeking, of course, to get petitions. Right now, it is standing at 78,815. The target is 150 to actually seek the release of Peter Biar Ajak, who is, I mentioned and I read lengthily on who he's all about. And of course, also information trickling into our studios, of course, is telling us, yes, his health is deteriorating right now. He's still in the slumbers, and he has no access to his family. They cannot visit, so we have no sounding idea on what is happening actually with Peter Biar Ajak way back in South Sudan. So what is the way forward? And closely, earlier on, we introduced Dr. Njoki Wamai, who was a classmate of Peter Biar Ajak at Cambridge University, where he was pursuing his PhD. And Njoki, we know this could be quite frustrating, but I know the efforts from Harvard University, efforts from also Cambridge University, they're bearing fruit so far. And of course, we had the New York, that was the UNGA, the United Nations convention in New York, and you were expected to present a petition to the Secretary General of the United Nations as far as this is concerned. Were you in any way, if you're privy to this particular information, what mileage did you make on that particular front? And if we get yes, this petition, then what?
I think from the beginning we've had like two strands or two dilemmas,
yes,
on how to go around activism around freeing Peter. And initially, of course, we started externally, I mean, especially in Cambridge and in the US, making a lot of noise. And then we had his brother and his wife, Nyathon, in South Sudan advised us that maybe because the authorities in South Sudan might think that, you know, there's a problem, we may want to tone down the activism around that, so that it doesn't seem like an external pressure, Western influence and that kind of thing. So there has been also a lot of dilemmas around that. I am not, I knew about the petition. I think the petition will be important just again to bring more traction on why this is important and why Peter needs to be free. As we've had news just in, his health is deteriorating from Nyathon, his wife. Yeah, and so, yeah, so we need to urgently do something, and I hope the new and special envoy to South Sudan can focus on the political prisoners.
All right. Okay, so that is the case. If you've not really signed the petition, and if you're aware of Peter Biar Ajak, in a moment we'll just run the clip by you so that you can get to hear what he had to say maybe about that particular IGAD, of course, led process for the peace in South Sudan, where we had this particular now current government that is really bloated right now. But that you can head over to www.change.org, Freedom for Peter Biar Ajak, where the petition, as I mentioned before, it is 78,815 who have signed so far. And you can read the rest of his details over here. Maybe as we are wrapping up on this, Ambassador Esses Moncha, yes, given that his health is deteriorating right now, that should be a worry.
And that is a clear violation of human rights, because at least they should take him to the hospital. And I think, just to echo what Njoki said, we saw a lot of international community around the concern of Khashoggi and the others. And I think this is what we would really advocate for, that we should really put pressure, maximum pressure, to South Sudan to embark on a new chapter if they are serious about this peace deal. And one of them is to free all the political prisoners. If not, let them be isolated then.
Right. Lastly, Mustafa?
Yeah, again, Dibal, we are not going to tire in asking the government of South Sudan to immediately and without any condition release Peter Biar Ajak. And they are holding him against the law. There is no charge that has been brought before the courts in South Sudan or any other court in this world against Peter Biar Ajak. If they really care about human beings, they should release Peter Biar Ajak.
Right, and of course we shall be doggedly following also that particular case that was filed by the East African Courts of Justice, and we get the latest development on that. As mentioned, that the Arusha-based Pan-African Lawyers Union has also gone to the East African Court of Justice to force the South Sudan government to release political detainees, one of whom is Peter Biar Ajak, and the government is accused of denying the detainees access to their families, lawyers and doctors. They are confined and given 1 meal per day. And also, since Mr. Ajak's arrest, the campaign hashtag Free Peter Biar has generated considerable support online, and Mr. Ajak has been the leading voice of the civil society in South Sudan, calling for generational change as the only way for peace to come to South Sudan. And he has been here before when he made a presentation about the generation exits. Maybe this is what the government of South Sudan don't really want to hear. It's time maybe the old coots will pass the baton to the young, fresh, people who are forward-looking, and they're visionary for this particular country, aside from people who are coming with all these baggages, from history in South Sudan. Maybe Irongo, you can actually comment on that briefly as we're winding up on this.
So I think for the leaders that are watching this show this morning, I think there are a number of things that I would speak to them on. One is that over the last 90 days, there has been a clear, demonstrable public concern at the condition of Peter and other political prisoners. As we're hearing, he needs medical attention, he also needs access to a lawyer, and he needs general access from his family and loved ones. But more importantly than that, he needs to be released. So I think that should be the call to action for diplomats within this region. And I'm sure, because I know your program is very popular, Debal, that there are member state officers of the South Sudanese government watching this program as well. And I think we can appeal to them also that this is not in the interests of the peace accord. It is not in the interests of the normalization of South Sudanese democracy. And I think as the UN Security Council meets on Friday, I think those people, and there are a few UN diplomats in Nairobi at the moment, that they need to really make sure that this agenda is brought to the UN Security Council alongside the violation of the arms embargo. I think the African Union needs to publicly now make its intentions clear, and I think that's another area that we could perhaps focus on alongside our Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the newly appointed UN envoy, Kalonzo Musyoka. So these would be the pressure points, I think, towards essentially removing this clot, this blur, this shadow over the peace accord.
All right.